Sticking brakes can cause a variety of problems, everything from abnormal pad wear to vehicle pull. But typically, the causes that lead to sticking brakes are easily avoidable. Hi, I'm Pete Meyer, and this is Cardone PROTECH.
The Cardone PROTECH series is produced in partnership with Motor Age, America's oldest trade publication for the automotive professional.
Sticking brakes can display a variety of symptoms. For example, a vehicle that wants to drift to one side or the other could be caused by sticking brakes. Abnormal pad wear could be caused by sticking brakes. A vehicle that doesn't seem to want to leave a stop as easily as it should could be caused by sticking brakes. And if there is a wheel where the brake is not releasing like it should, it's usually caused by one of three things. Either the caliper piston is seized in its bore, the slide pins for the caliper assembly are seized, or there's a brake line obstruction that's preventing brake pressure from being released. And one of the first components that we tend to blame for sticking brakes is the caliper. Now, if it is a failed caliper, often the causes that led to the failure are easily avoidable. The first culprit that can cause this problem is the protective boot that seals the piston and caliper bore from outside contaminants. And this exposes the seal that we really want to protect. This fluid seal that seals the piston caliper to the bore. Now, this seal actually serves two purposes. One, of course, is to keep the fluid inside the caliper assembly where it belongs. But the other is just as important. It actually helps retract the piston when you take your foot off the pedal. The seal is a tapered design, and when the piston is pushed outward, the seal deflects with it, retracting it back into its original position when the hydraulic pressure is released. And that seal can stay protected as long as we treat this dust boot with the respect it deserves. Inspect the boot carefully for deterioration and tears. Make sure it's seated properly around the piston and in the caliper bore. Avoid any damage to the boot as you retract the pistons during normal brake service. Another common reason for sticking caliper pistons is unique to rear calipers that incorporate the parking brake system in the caliper assembly. When you press the brake, the caliper piston rotates back and forth instead of just moving freely as it does in the front caliper. Then, when your customer applies the parking brake, the piston rotates ever so slightly to engage the pads to the rotor. If your customer doesn't use their parking brake very often, the components can seize up and freeze when they are applied, leading to a sticking rear brake caliper assembly. You'll usually pick up on this when you perform a pad replacement and you have to wind the piston back into the bore using a special tool. And be careful, don't allow the piston dust boot to become twisted as you retract the pistons. That could lead to damage. Additionally, brake fluid that has become unserviceable, that is, its additives have been depleted, can lead to corrosion buildup throughout the hydraulic system. It's a good idea to use test strips to measure both the copper content and the acidity of the fluid. If either is too high, recommend a fluid exchange. Slide pins that have seized due to corrosion from lack of lubrication are another common cause of sticking brakes. Slider pins are designed to allow the caliper to move freely in order to apply even pressure on both brake pads. The number one reason for issues with the slide pins is lack of lubrication. And while the designs may vary, the need for lubrication exists in all of them. You'll usually find that each pin has a tiny protective boot of its own that prevents any water, debris, and grime from getting stuck inside the slider pin bore. If the boots are damaged, any contaminants that find their way inside will get between the pin and its bore and cause excessive friction that will eventually lead to sticking or even seizure of the pins. To prevent this, inspect the rubber boots and lubricate the pins every time you service your customer's brakes. Use a good quality silicone-based lubricant designed for this application. Silicone is safe for the rubber components and won't lead to their deterioration, unlike some petroleum-based lubricants. And hey, this is even a great new opportunity for service for you. Hybrid and EV vehicles brake primarily by a process known as regenerative braking. The hydraulic system is rarely, if ever, used, but that doesn't mean they don't need routine service. Most hybrid and EV manufacturers recommend that their foundational hydraulic brake systems be inspected, cleaned, and lubricated annually or every 15,000 miles. Again, it's not used often, so this is to ensure that when the need does arise, the foundational hydraulic system will work the way it's supposed to. The third item on our list is brake line obstruction. Brake lines use an inner line to carry the brake fluid. The rubber exterior you see is there to protect that line. The inner line can be damaged by clamping off the brake hose with a tool not designed for the purpose, or by allowing the caliper to hang from the hose during service. If the line becomes collapsed because it was pinched off incorrectly, or narrowed because the weight of the caliper was allowed to hang from the hose, either of these causes a restriction that acts as a one-way valve. When you press on the pedal, pressure of the fluid will get the fluid past the obstruction, but once that pressure is removed, it can't go back in the other direction. So from that point forward, the pressure is still applied and the brakes can't release. To determine whether that sticking brake is caused by a seized caliper or a brake line obstruction, simply rotate the hub and rotor assembly and then loosen the bleed screw on the caliper. If the pressure is released and the rotor begins to turn freely, odds are pretty good that it's a brake line obstruction. And when you replace the hose, be careful to properly torque either end of the line to avoid damage. In addition to the things that we've talked about so far today, here are a few additional tips to help you when you perform your next brake service. Never hang the caliper by the brake hose. Clean the hub and the interior of the rotor hat to prevent tolerances from stacking up and causing the two to become out of alignment. Inspect the hub or wheel bearing for wear. There may not be noticeable play, so use a dial indicator. Wear here can lead to noise and eventually brake pulsation. And check the final assembly for lateral runout and correct as needed if excessive. And always use a torque wrench on the caliper mounting bolts and the caliper bracket bolts. Sticky brakes can be caused by any of the things that we've talked about today, either alone or in combination with one another. So always make sure that you do a final inspection and test drive to verify that everything is working the way it should before you return the vehicle to your customer. Thanks for watching.